The silence in St. Mary's Chapel was deafening. Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore stood at the altar in her grandmother's simple white dress, hands trembling as 500 pairs of eyes bore into her soul. Victoria Thornfield's voice cut through the sacred air like a blade. "Before my son makes the biggest mistake of his life," Victoria announced, her diamond necklace catching the stained glass light, "I'm offering you $950 million to walk away right now." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Sarah's blue eyes found Michael's face, the man she'd loved for 6 months, who'd promised her forever. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at his polished shoes, his jaw clenched tight. The poor girl from Millbrook, Ohio, who served coffee at Murphy's Diner, who'd never owned anything worth more than $20, slowly reached for the microphone. "Mrs. Thornfield," Sarah whispered, her voice steady as granite, "you can't buy what you've already lost. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story." 6 months earlier, Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore had been wiping down the cracked vinyl booths at Murphy's Diner when her life changed forever. At 24, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that needed no enhancement: golden hair that caught sunlight like spun wheat, cornflower blue eyes that held depths of kindness, and a smile that could warm the coldest heart in Millbrook, Ohio. Sarah had learned early that life didn't come with guarantees. Orphaned at 8 when her parents died in a car accident, she'd been raised by her grandmother Margaret in a tiny apartment above the town's only flower shop. Margaret Whitmore had been a woman of few words but infinite wisdom, teaching Sarah that character is what you do when nobody's watching, and true wealth lives in the hearts you touch. When Margaret passed 3 years ago, Sarah inherited nothing but debt and a locket containing her grandmother's faded photograph. She'd taken the job at Murphy's Diner, serving coffee and comfort food to truckers, farmers, and the occasional lost traveler who wandered into their forgotten corner of America. The pay barely covered her studio apartment rent, but Sarah never complained. She had dreams, big dreams of opening a home for children like herself, kids who needed someone to believe in them. Michael James Thornfield represented everything Sarah had never known. The 29-year-old heir to Thornfield Industries commanded a business empire worth nearly $1 billion, built on manufacturing and real estate across 3 states. Tall and handsome, with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes, Michael had been groomed since childhood to take over the family legacy. But beneath the tailored suits and boarding school polish lived a man who questioned everything his privilege had given him. His mother, Victoria Louise Thornfield, ruled their Greenwich, Connecticut estate with an iron fist wrapped in Chanel. At 56, she was a masterpiece of surgical enhancement and social ambition, her past buried so deep that even she sometimes forgot the frightened girl she'd once been. Victoria had clawed her way into high society through marriage and had no intention of watching her son throw it all away. The Thornfield patriarch, Richard Charles Thornfield Sr., had built his fortune through ruthless determination and strategic marriages. At 62, he viewed emotion as weakness and love as a luxury the wealthy couldn't afford. His steel-gray eyes had seen empires rise and fall, and he had no patience for anything that threatened the family name. In the shadows lurked Catherine Kate Pemberton, 27 and beautiful in the way that money could buy and maintain. Born into old money, Kate had been promised to Michael since childhood, not officially, but in the way that wealthy families arranged such things. She possessed everything Sarah lacked: pedigree, connections, and a trust fund that would make most small countries envious. 2 worlds, 2 different definitions of worth, and one collision that would change everything. The autumn rain hammered Highway 62 like bullets against glass when Michael Thornfield's midnight blue Porsche began sputtering to a halt. Steam rose from under the hood as he coasted into the gravel parking lot of Murphy's Diner, its neon sign flickering "Good Food, Good People" in pink cursive letters. Michael had been driving aimlessly for hours, escaping another suffocating board meeting where his father had lectured him about responsibility to the family legacy. Sarah looked up from refilling the coffee pot when the stranger in the expensive suit pushed through the glass door, shaking raindrops from his dark hair. She'd seen his type before, city people who took wrong turns and ended up in Millbrook by accident, usually wearing expressions of barely concealed disgust at finding themselves in flyover country. But this man was different. When their eyes met across the nearly empty diner, something electric passed between them. He didn't look at her like she was invisible, the way wealthy people usually looked at waitresses. He saw her. "Car trouble?" Sarah asked, approaching with a steaming cup of coffee she hadn't been asked to bring. Michael accepted the cup gratefully, his fingers brushing hers for just a moment. "Engine overheated. I'm not exactly sure where I am." "You're in Millbrook, Ohio. Population 2,847, home of the Fighting Eagles and the best apple pie in 3 counties. Sarah's smile was genuine, warm enough to chase away the chill from his rain-soaked drive. "I'm Sarah." "Mike," he said, the lie rolling off his tongue easier than he'd expected. He couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at him without calculating his net worth. Mike Thompson. Over the next 2 hours, while they waited for the local mechanic to arrive, Michael discovered something he'd never experienced: genuine conversation. Sarah didn't probe about his job or judge his expensive watch. Instead, she told him about Millbrook's history, about the families who'd farmed the same land for generations, about her dream of opening a children's home someday. "Kids need to know someone believes in them," she said, refilling his cup for the 3rd time. "When I was little, after my parents died, my grandmother used to say that we're all just walking each other home. Some people need more help than others." Michael found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone: his frustration with board meetings that felt like theater, his doubt about whether he wanted the life mapped out for him since birth, his loneliness despite being surrounded by people who claimed to care about him. When the mechanic finally arrived, Michael almost didn't want to leave. He paid for his coffee and left a $100 tip, watching Sarah's eyes widen in surprise. "That's too much," she protested. "It's not nearly enough," he replied, meaning every word. 3 days later, Michael found an excuse to drive back to Millbrook, then again the following week. Each visit lasted longer than the last. He told himself he was just exploring Ohio's back roads, but the truth was simpler and more complicated. Sarah Whitmore made him feel like himself for the first time in his life. Their courtship unfolded like something from another era. Michael would arrive at the diner during Sarah's breaks, and they'd walk through Millbrook's tree-lined streets, talking about everything and nothing. He met Mrs. Henderson, who ran the flower shop where Sarah's grandmother had worked. He sat in on Sarah's Sunday school class at St. Mary's Chapel, watching her teach Bible stories to children who hung on her every word. Sarah showed him the small apartment where she lived, apologizing for the thrift store furniture and the way the radiator clanged. Michael thought it was perfect, warm and lived in, every object telling a story, her grandmother's quilt mended in a dozen places, books borrowed from the library, their pages worn soft from repeated reading, a windowsill herb garden that made the whole place smell like home. For 3 months, Michael lived a double life. In Greenwich, he attended charity galas and business dinners, playing the role of dutiful heir. In Millbrook, he was just Mike, the city guy who'd found his way to the best diner in Ohio and fallen in love with the waitress who served pie with a smile. Sarah began to suspect something wasn't quite right when Mike's stories didn't add up. He claimed to work in accounting, but his hands were too soft for office work. He said he lived in a small apartment, but his clothes were clearly expensive. When she asked about his family, his answers were vague, evasive. The truth came crashing down on a Tuesday evening in February. Sarah was closing the diner when she spotted a familiar car in the parking lot. Not Mike's repaired Porsche, but a black Mercedes with Connecticut plates. Through the window, she saw him on the phone, his voice urgent. "Yes, Mother, I understand the quarterly reports are due. Yes, I'll be back for the Hartford acquisition meeting." A pause. "No, I haven't forgotten about Kate's birthday party. I'll escort her, just like always." Sarah's heart stopped. She'd heard that name before, Catherine Pemberton, the socialite whose engagement party had been featured in Connecticut magazine. The woman who was rumored to be Michael Thornfield's future wife. Michael Thornfield, not Mike Thompson. When he entered the diner moments later, Sarah was waiting with his usual coffee and a slice of apple pie, but her blue eyes held a different expression: hurt, betrayal, and something else. Disappointment. "Busy day at the accounting firm?" she asked quietly. Michael's smile faltered. He saw the magazine on the counter, open to a page featuring his photograph at a charity auction. His face was prominently displayed next to Kate's, the caption reading "Connecticut's Golden Couple." "Sarah, I can explain." "Can you?" She set the coffee down with hands that barely trembled. "Because I've been trying to figure out why an accountant drives a car worth more than most people's houses, why he leaves $100 tips, why he knows more about international finance than anyone I've ever met." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Michael reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "My name is Michael Thornfield," he said finally. "My family owns Thornfield Industries. And yes, I lied to you. But everything else, everything I've told you about how I feel, about what you mean to me, that's the only truth that matters." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the wealthy heir, not the guy who'd been slumming it in small-town Ohio, just a man who'd been as lost as she was, who'd found something real in the last place he'd expected to look. "Why?" she whispered. "Because for the first time in my life someone liked me for who I am, not what I have. Because when I'm with you, I feel like the man I want to be instead of the man I'm supposed to be." Sarah's hand found his across the counter. "What happens now?" "I don't know," Michael admitted. "But I know I can't lose you. I won't lose you." Neither of them could have imagined that within months, Sarah would be standing at an altar, facing down Michael's mother and a fortune that could change her life forever. They couldn't have predicted the war that was about to be waged for Michael's soul, with Sarah's heart as the ultimate prize. All they knew was that love had found them in a diner in Ohio, and somehow, against all odds, it felt like enough. The call came on a Thursday morning in March, while Sarah was teaching Sunday school lesson plans at her kitchen table. Michael's voice carried a nervous energy she'd never heard before. "My mother wants to meet you," he said without preamble. "This weekend, at the estate." Sarah's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. In the 3 weeks since Michael had revealed his true identity, they'd existed in a careful bubble, meeting in Millbrook where his name meant nothing and her love meant everything. The outside world, his world, had remained safely distant. "She knows about us?" "I told her." Michael's sigh carried across the phone line. "She's been pushing the Kate situation and I couldn't keep lying. Sarah, I need you to understand something about my family. They're complicated, difficult. But you're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I want them to see that." Friday evening found Sarah standing before her tiny closet, staring at hangers that held mostly uniform polo shirts and a single black dress she'd worn to her grandmother's funeral. Michael had offered to buy her something new, an offer she'd declined with such quiet dignity that he'd immediately apologized for suggesting it. She chose a simple navy blue dress from the thrift store, one that had probably cost someone a month's rent years ago, but now sold for $12. Her grandmother's pearl earrings, The only jewelry of value she owned completed the ensemble. Looking in the mirror, Sarah saw what she always saw: a small-town girl with big dreams and a bigger heart. The drive to Greenwich took 2 hours, the landscape gradually shifting from Ohio farmland to Connecticut sophistication. Michael's tension increased with every mile, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as they passed through wrought iron gates and up a curved driveway lined with ancient oaks. Thornfield Estate rose before them like something from a movie: red brick and white columns, manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than Sarah's annual salary. A fountain featuring marble cherubs dominated the circular drive, where a uniformed valet waited to take Michael's keys. "Remember," Michael whispered as they climbed the front steps, "I love you. That's all that matters." Victoria Thornfield opened the door herself, a power move that immediately put Sarah on notice. Tall and elegant in a way that money could buy and maintain, she wore a cream-colored silk blouse that probably cost more than Sarah's rent. Her smile was perfect, practiced, and absolutely frigid. "You must be Sarah," Victoria said, her voice carrying the kind of boarding school accent that turned simple words into weapons. "How quaint." The tour of the house was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Victoria guided them through rooms that belonged in museums, Persian rugs that had been in the family for generations, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, a library containing first-edition volumes worth small fortunes. Each room whispered the same message: "You don't belong here." "This is the morning room," Victoria announced, gesturing to a space larger than Sarah's entire apartment. "We take breakfast here when we're not traveling. Do you travel much, dear?" "Not really," Sarah replied honestly. "I've never been outside Ohio." "How limiting." Victoria's smile could have frozen flame. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 30, though only 4 place settings graced the mahogany table. Richard Thornfield Sr. emerged from his study like a storm cloud, his steel-gray eyes assessing Sarah with the same intensity he might use to evaluate a quarterly report. "So you're the waitress," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I prefer hospitality professional," Sarah replied evenly, earning a sharp look from Victoria and a barely suppressed smile from Michael. The meal proceeded like a deposition. Victoria's questions came wrapped in silk but landed like hammers. Where had Sarah gone to college? Nowhere. She'd gone straight to work after high school. What did her parents do? They died when she was young. What were her career aspirations? She hoped to open a children's home someday. "How noble," Victoria murmured. "And how do you plan to fund this endeavor?" "Hard work, saving, maybe a small business loan eventually." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah like a specimen under glass. "Young lady, do you have any idea what it costs to run a legitimate charitable organization? The insurance alone would bankrupt someone in your circumstances." "I believe where there's a will, there's a way," Sarah replied, her grandmother's words steadying her voice. "Charming," Victoria said, the word dripping condescension. "Michael, darling, you remember Kate's exhibition next week? She's been working so hard on her photography, such talent and from such a good family." The message was clear. Kate Pemberton possessed everything Sarah lacked: breeding, connections, and a trust fund that would ensure she'd never struggle for anything. After dinner, while Michael and his father discussed business in the study, Victoria invited Sarah for coffee in the sunroom. The space was beautiful, glass walls overlooking gardens that would be spectacular in spring, furniture arranged to catch the last rays of evening light. "You seem like a sweet girl," Victoria began, settling into a chair that probably cost more than Sarah's car. "So I'm going to be direct. How much?" Sarah set down her coffee cup carefully. "I'm sorry? How much will it take for you to walk away? 50,000? 100? I'm prepared to be generous." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd expected dislike, even hostility. But this casual assumption that her love could be purchased felt like being flayed alive. "Mrs. Thornfield," Sarah said quietly, "you can't buy what isn't for sale." Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass. "My dear child, everything is for sale. It's simply a matter of price. You're pretty enough, I'll give you that. But Michael needs a wife who can match his station, who understands his responsibilities. Kate Pemberton has been bred for this life. You're a lovely diversion, but that's all. I love your son." Love. Victoria waved the word away like smoke. "Love is a luxury people like us can't afford. Michael has duties to his family, to his company, to his legacy. You're standing in the way of all of that." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. "I think I should go. I think you should consider my offer. $250,000. Cash. More money than you've ever dreamed of. Enough to start your little charity. Enough to build the life you want. All you have to do is disappear." The number hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. $250,000, enough to transform her life, to help countless children, to make every dream she'd ever had come true. All she had to do was break her own heart and Michael's in the process. Sarah stood slowly, her legs unsteady. "I need to find Michael." "Think about it," Victoria called after her. "I won't make this offer again." Sarah found Michael in the study with his father, both men looking grim. Whatever they'd been discussing had clearly not gone well. "We should go," Sarah said from the doorway. Michael took one look at her pale face and was on his feet immediately. "What happened?" "Nothing. Everything. We should go." The drive back to Millbrook passed in tense silence. Michael kept glancing at Sarah, who stared out the window at the dark Connecticut countryside rolling past. Finally, as they crossed into Ohio, she told him about his mother's offer. Michael pulled the car over so suddenly that gravel sprayed from beneath the tires. His face went white, then red with fury. "She did what?" "She thinks I'm after your money." Sarah's voice was very small. "She thinks I'm some kind of gold digger who'll take a payoff and disappear." "Sarah, you have to know that's not—" "Do I?" Sarah turned to face him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Michael, I've never felt so small in my life. Your mother looked at me like I was something she'd scrape off her shoe. Your father treated me like a business problem to be solved, and the terrible thing is, part of me understands why." "Don't say that. Look at us." Sarah gestured between them. "Really look. You're worth almost $1 billion. I make minimum wage plus tips. You went to Harvard. I didn't go to college at all. You live in a house that could be a museum. I live in a studio apartment with a radiator that sounds like it's dying." Michael reached for her hands. "None of that matters. It does to your family. And maybe they're right. Maybe I am being selfish, thinking I could fit into your world." "You're not fitting into my world," Michael said fiercely. "You're creating a new one, a better one, a world where what matters is who you are, not what you have." Sarah wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But Victoria's words echoed in her mind, mixing with her own deepest fears about worthiness and belonging. "Your mother increased her offer to $500,000, Sarah said quietly. Michael's grip on her hands tightened. And for just a moment I thought about it. Not for me, but for all the children I could help with that money. How many kids could I save? How many lives could I change? Sarah? But then I realized that taking that money would teach them exactly the wrong lesson. That love can be bought. That dreams have a price. That sometimes it's okay to sell your soul if the check is big enough. Sarah pulled her hands free and cupped Michael's face. I love you. Not your money, not your name, not your family's empire, just you. The man who sits in a diner in Ohio and talks about wanting to matter for something more than his bank account. Then marry me, Michael said suddenly. Not someday. Not when the timing is right. Now, this weekend, let's elope. Sarah's breath caught. Michael, I'm serious. We'll drive to Vegas, get married by Elvis, and spend our honeymoon in that terrible hotel with the heart-shaped bathtub. By the time we get back, it'll be done. They'll have to accept it. For a wild moment, Sarah could see it. The two of them running away together, choosing love over everything else. But even as the fantasy bloomed, reality crushed it. What about your family, your company, all those people who depend on Thornfield Industries for their jobs? I don't care. Yes, you do. And that's one of the reasons I love you. Sarah smiled through her tears. You're not a man who runs away from responsibility. You're a man who finds a way to do the right thing, even when it's hard. They sat in the car on the side of the highway, two people from different worlds who'd found each other against all odds, trying to figure out how to fight for a love that everyone seemed determined to destroy. So, what do we do? Michael asked. Sarah straightened her shoulders, channeling every lesson her grandmother had ever taught her about dignity and grace under pressure. We do what we've been doing. We love each other. We stay true to ourselves, and we trust that if this is meant to be, we'll find a way. And if my family never accepts you? Sarah's smile was sad but determined. Then we'll build our own family, one that understands that worth isn't measured in dollars. Neither of them could have predicted that Victoria Thornfield had already begun planning their destruction, or that the war for Michael's future was about to begin in earnest. They drove back to Millbrook in fragile hope, believing that love could conquer anything. They were about to learn how naive that belief could be. The war against Sarah Whitmore began with surgical precision the Monday morning after her disastrous visit to the Thornfield estate. Victoria sat in her mahogany-paneled office, a space that had witnessed the orchestration of hostile takeovers and political campaigns, now focused on destroying one small-town waitress who dared to love above her station. Find everything, Victoria instructed Marcus Webb, the private investigator whose services had proven invaluable in previous family crises. Traffic tickets, unpaid bills, college boyfriends, anything that might suggest she's not the innocent little angel she pretends to be. Webb nodded, making notes in his leather portfolio. And if there's nothing to find? Victoria's smile was razor sharp. Then we create something. Within 48 hours, the first assault began. Sarah arrived at Murphy's Diner to find 3 customers huddled over smartphones, their conversation dying abruptly when she approached with coffee. By afternoon, the whispers had spread through Millbrook like wildfire. The waitress was dating some rich boy from Connecticut, probably after his money, probably lying about her past. The damage wasn't immediately obvious. A few cold stares from regular customers, tips that seemed smaller than usual, conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Sarah told herself she was imagining things, that small-town gossip would blow over. She was wrong. Catherine Pemberton arrived in Millbrook on a Thursday, driving a white BMW convertible that turned heads throughout the small downtown. She was everything Sarah wasn't, tall and willowy, with honey-blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, wearing a designer sundress that cost more than Sarah made in 6 months. She took a table in Sarah's section at the diner and ordered black coffee with the kind of confident smile that suggested she owned the world. "You must be Sarah," Kate said when the coffee arrived. "I'm Catherine Pemberton." "Kate, I think we should talk." Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she set down the cup. She'd seen this woman in the society pages, photographed at charity galas and yacht clubs, always on Michael's arm, always looking like she belonged there. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," Sarah replied quietly. "Oh, but we do." Kate's voice carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to getting her way. "You see, Michael and I have an understanding. We've had one since we were children. Our families expect certain things, and frankly, so do we." Sarah felt every eye in the diner focused on their table. Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop was openly staring, her coffee growing cold as she listened. Jim Patterson, who delivered mail to every house in town, had stopped pretending to read his newspaper. "Michael loves me," Sarah said, the words barely above a whisper. Kate laughed, the sound like silver bells with a hint of cruelty. "Darling, Michael has always had a weakness for charity cases. There was the scholarship girl at prep school, the professor's daughter at Harvard. You're just the latest in a long line of girls he's rescued. But he always comes back to his own kind eventually. You don't know him like I do. Don't I?" Kate leaned forward, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent diner. "Did he tell you about Aspen last Christmas? About the weekend we spent in my family's cabin? About the promises he made?" The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Michael had mentioned going skiing with friends over the holidays, but he'd been vague about details. Now Kate's implication hung in the air like poison gas. "You're lying." "Am I? Check his Instagram from December 23rd through 26th. Oh wait, you're not connected on social media, are you? How curious." Almost like he's keeping you secret from his real life. Kate reached into her purse and withdrew a photograph. Michael and herself on a ski slope, his arm around her waist, both laughing at some shared joke. They looked perfect together, like the cover of a lifestyle magazine. "Keep it," Kate said, standing and leaving a $20 bill on the table. "Consider it a reminder of reality." After Kate left, the diner remained unnaturally quiet. Sarah finished her shift in a haze, mechanically refilling coffee cups and clearing tables while questions tormented her mind. Why hadn't Michael mentioned spending Christmas with Kate? Why weren't they connected on social media? How many other details of his life had he kept from her? That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment staring at the photograph Kate had left behind. Michael looked happy in the picture, relaxed in a way she'd rarely seen him. His smile was genuine, his body language comfortable and familiar with Kate's proximity. Sarah had never been skiing, had never worn the kind of expensive winter gear that looked natural on both of them. When Michael called that night, his voice was warm and loving as always. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Sarah almost asked about Aspen, about Kate, about the photograph. But something held her back. Fear, maybe, or the growing certainty that she didn't want to hear his explanations. "Fine," she said instead. "Just the usual." The anonymous letters began arriving the next week. Someone was slipping them under Sarah's apartment door, always during the hours she worked at the diner. The first one was typed on expensive paper, the words carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. "Ask Michael about the private investigator his mother hired. Ask him why he hasn't told his friends about you. Ask him what he really thinks about your future together." Sarah threw the letter away, but its poison had already entered her bloodstream. When Michael picked her up for dinner that Friday, she found herself studying his face for signs of deception, analyzing his words for hidden meanings. The second letter arrived 3 days later. "Check the public records for Harrison Holdings. Look up the Columbia acquisition. See what Michael really does to people who get in his family's way." Despite herself, Sarah found herself at the library the next day, using their computer to research Thornfield Industries. What she found made her stomach turn. 6 months ago, the company had acquired a small manufacturing firm in Columbia, Ohio, a town not unlike Millbrook. The acquisition had resulted in the closure of the plant and the loss of 200 jobs. Michael had been listed as the project manager. When confronted, Michael's explanation was passionate and defensive. The plant had been failing anyway, he insisted. The acquisition had actually saved some jobs that would have been lost entirely. But Sarah couldn't forget the newspaper photos of families devastated by the closure. Couldn't stop wondering if this was what awaited Millbrook if she continued to be an inconvenience to the Thornfield family. Victoria escalated her campaign in the third week, targeting the diner itself. Health inspectors arrived without warning, finding violations that had never existed before. A broken tile in the kitchen that somehow constituted a safety hazard, temperature readings on the refrigeration units that fell just outside acceptable ranges. The fines weren't enormous, but they were enough to strain Murphy's already tight budget. Ruth Murphy, who'd owned the diner for 30 years, called Sarah into her office after the inspectors left. Ruth was a motherly woman in her 60s who'd given Sarah a job when no one else would, who'd covered her shifts when Sarah had food poisoning, who'd become the closest thing to family Sarah had left in Millbrook. "Honey," Ruth said gently, "I don't know what's going on, but these inspections, they're not random. Someone with influence is putting pressure on this place." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Mrs. Murphy, I'm so sorry. If this is because of me, I'm not saying it is and I'm not saying it isn't, but I've got employees to think about, a business to protect. Maybe you should consider whether this relationship is worth the trouble it's causing." That night, Sarah walked through Millbrook's quiet streets, past the houses where she'd grown up, the church where her grandmother had taken her every Sunday, the playground where she'd dreamed of building something better. For the first time since falling in love with Michael, she wondered if loving him was selfish, if her happiness was worth the collateral damage it seemed to cause. The breaking point came when Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She'd missed her period and felt nauseated for days before finally buying a test from the pharmacy 2 towns over, too embarrassed to purchase it in Millbrook where everyone knew her business. The 2 pink lines appeared immediately, undeniable and terrifying. Sarah sat on her bathroom floor, holding the test with shaking hands. A baby. Michael's baby. Part of her was thrilled. She'd always wanted children. Had always dreamed of giving a child the love and stability she'd lost so young. But another part of her was paralyzed with fear. How could she raise a child in this environment of hostility and judgment? How could she bring a baby into a war zone? She called Michael immediately, her voice breaking as she told him the news. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Joy, excitement, immediate plans for their future together. "This changes everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going to be a family, Sarah. A real family." For 3 beautiful days, Sarah allowed herself to believe that love could conquer anything. She imagined Michael holding their baby, teaching him or her to walk in the garden behind her apartment building. She pictured family dinners and bedtime stories and all the ordinary magic of raising a child with the man she loved. The miscarriage came on a Tuesday morning, sudden and devastating. Sarah woke to cramping and bleeding, rushed herself to the hospital in the next town, and lost the baby before Michael could even get there from Connecticut. The doctor said it was common, that early miscarriages happened to 1 in 4 pregnancies, that it wasn't anyone's fault. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that stress had played a role. The constant tension, the sleepless nights, the weight of fighting a battle she couldn't win. In her darkest moments, she wondered if her body had simply recognized that this wasn't the right time or place to bring a child into the world. And Michael held her as she cried, his own tears falling into her hair. They grieved together in her small apartment, clinging to each other as the future they'd briefly imagined crumbled around them. "We'll try again," Michael promised. "When things are more settled, when my family comes around." When? Sarah interrupted, her voice hollow. When will that be, Michael? When will your mother stop hiring investigators and health inspectors? When will Kate stop showing up with photographs? When will the anonymous letters stop coming? Michael's face went white. What letters? Sarah showed him the small pile she'd kept, watching his expression grow darker with each one he read. His hands shook as he set them aside. I'll handle this, he said grimly. I'll put an end to all of it. But they both knew it was too late. The damage had been done, not just to their relationship, but to Sarah's place in the community she'd called home her entire life. The war had claimed its first casualties, their unborn child and Sarah's faith that love could survive anything. As autumn turned to winter, Sarah found herself accepting the invitations to family dinners less frequently, making excuses when Michael wanted to spend weekends in Millbrook. She was protecting herself, building walls that grew higher with each anonymous letter, each cold stare from former friends, each reminder that she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. Michael sensed her withdrawal but didn't know how to bridge the growing distance between them. His own family pressures were intensifying. Board meetings where his father questioned his judgment, social events where Kate appeared at his side while photographers captured their every interaction for the society pages. The final blow came in February, when Sarah learned that someone had called her employer at the children's charity where she volunteered on weekends, spreading rumors about her character and suggesting that she wasn't suitable to work with children. The charity director, apologetic but firm, suggested that Sarah might want to step back from her volunteer work until the situation resolved itself. Sarah sat in her car outside the charity office, staring at the building where she'd hoped to learn skills for her future children's home. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd dreamed of, was being systematically destroyed by people who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to their plans. For the first time since meeting Michael, Sarah wondered if Victoria Thornfield had been right all along. Maybe some distances were too great to bridge. Maybe love wasn't enough when the whole world was determined to keep you apart. As winter deepened and Michael's marriage proposal grew imminent, Sarah faced the hardest question of her life. Was holding on to love worth losing everything else? Or was it time to admit that some fairy tales were never meant to come true? The war for Michael Thornfield's future was entering its final phase, and Sarah Whitmore was running out of ammunition to fight it. The proposal came on Valentine's Day in the exact spot where they'd first met, Booth 7 at Murphy's Diner. Michael had reserved the entire restaurant for the evening, filling it with white roses and candles that cast dancing shadows on the worn vinyl seats. Sarah wore the same navy dress from their first dinner at his family's estate, but this time it felt like armor rather than vulnerability. Michael dropped to one knee beside their table, producing a ring that caught the candlelight like captured starfire. The diamond was perfect, not ostentatiously large but clearly expensive, set in a vintage platinum band that spoke of family heirlooms and generational wealth. Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore, Michael said, his voice trembling with emotion, you've shown me what love really means. You've taught me that home isn't a place, it's wherever you are. Will you marry me? Every fairy tale Sarah had ever read demanded that she say yes. The man she loved was offering her everything, his heart, his name, his future. But as she looked at the ring, all she could see were the battles that would follow, the war that would never end as long as she remained an outsider, trying to breach the Thornfield fortress. Yes, she whispered, because her heart gave her no choice. The ring slid onto her finger like a shackle made of starlight. Michael's kiss tasted of joy and desperation, of two people clinging to love in a storm that threatened to tear them apart. Neither of them mentioned the obvious, that they'd just declared war on one of the most powerful families in Connecticut. Victoria Thornfield learned of the engagement within hours. Her response was swift and merciless. Absolutely not. she declared during an emergency family meeting in the estate's library. Michael sat across from his parents, Sarah's ring burning like a brand on his finger where he'd moved it after the proposal. "I will not watch you destroy everything 3 generations of Thornfields have built for some little nobody from Ohio." "Her name is Sarah," Michael said quietly, "and I love her." "Love," Victoria spat the word like poison. "Do you think I didn't love your father when we married? Do you think love pays for private schools and charity galas and the lifestyle you've enjoyed your entire life? Love is a luxury, Michael. Responsibility is forever." Richard Thornfield Sr. leaned back in his leather chair, studying his son with calculating eyes. "The board is already asking questions about your judgment. The Columbia acquisition was sloppy. Too much emotion, not enough strategy. They're wondering if you're ready to take over the company." "I've given my life to this company," Michael shot back. "I've done everything you've asked, attended every meeting, made every sacrifice. I'm not asking for your permission to marry Sarah." "I'm telling you, it's happening." Victoria's laugh was like breaking crystal. "With what money, darling? Your trust fund doesn't vest until you're 35, and only if you meet certain conditions. Marrying that girl isn't one of them." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Michael's jaw clenched as he realized the trap his family had been setting his entire life, golden handcuffs that kept him bound to their expectations. "Then I'll make my own way," he said finally. "Doing what?" Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. "You've never held a job outside this company. You have no practical skills, no connections outside our social circle. You're 30 years old, Michael. It's time to grow up and accept reality." The family meeting ended in stalemate, but Victoria was far from finished. Within days, she'd activated every weapon in her considerable arsenal. The engagement announcement appeared in the Connecticut Post on a Sunday morning, but not the version Michael had submitted. Someone had altered the text, describing Sarah as a service industry worker from rural Ohio, and noting that the couple met when Mr. Thornfield's vehicle broke down near her workplace. The implications were clear. He was a wealthy man who'd been temporarily charmed by a waitress, a classic rebound story that would burn itself out. The photograph accompanying the article was worse. Instead of the professional engagement photo Michael had arranged, the paper printed a candid shot of Sarah in her Murphy's Diner uniform, looking tired and slightly disheveled after a long shift. The contrast with Kate Pemberton's Society page appearances was deliberate and devastating. Sarah saw the article when Mrs. Henderson brought it to the diner, her face grim with sympathetic embarrassment. "Honey," the older woman said gently, "maybe you should see this before someone else shows you." Reading the announcement felt like being flayed alive. Every word was technically true, but arranged to make her sound like a gold-digging opportunist who'd ensnared a naive rich boy. The comment section online was worse. Hundreds of strangers offering opinions about her motives, her appearance, her worthiness to marry into Connecticut society. "She's pretty enough, but clearly out of her league. Poor guy probably doesn't realize what he's getting into. Give it 6 months before she shows her true colors." Michael arrived at the diner that afternoon in a fury, demanding to know which editor had butchered his announcement. But Sarah could see the doubt creeping into his eyes as he read the comments, the way he seemed to be seeing her through strangers' eyes for the first time. The final assault came during what should have been their engagement party. Michael had insisted on hosting it at the country club where he'd played tennis as a child, determined to introduce Sarah to his social circle as his future wife. Sarah had spent her last savings on a cocktail dress from a department store, hoping to blend into a world where women's jewelry cost more than her annual rent. The event was beautiful. A waterfront terrace overlooking Long Island Sound, string quartet playing classical music, waiters circulating with champagne and canapes that Sarah couldn't pronounce. But from the moment they arrived, Sarah felt like an exhibit in a zoo. studied and judged by people who'd known Michael since childhood. Kate Pemberton arrived fashionably late, wearing a silver dress that probably cost more than Sarah's car. She moved through the crowd like a queen reclaiming her throne, accepting air kisses and sympathetic glances from women who clearly saw her as the wronged party in this drama. "Sarah, darling," Kate said, appearing at Sarah's elbow with a smile that could cut glass. "What a lovely dress. So affordable looking." Before Sarah could respond, Kate had slipped away, leaving her standing alone while Michael was pulled into conversations about business deals and mutual acquaintances. Sarah nursed a glass of champagne she didn't want, feeling increasingly isolated as the evening wore on. The breaking point came when Victoria took the microphone for what everyone assumed would be a gracious welcome speech. Instead, she delivered a masterclass in public humiliation. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate my son's announcement," Victoria began, her pause loaded with meaning. "Michael has always had such a generous heart. Even as a child, he was constantly bringing home strays, injured birds, lost puppies, anyone or anything that needed rescuing." The crowd murmured appreciatively, missing the poison in Victoria's words. Sarah felt her cheeks burn as the implications became clear. "Of course, we've always known that Michael would eventually settle down with someone appropriate to his station, someone who understands the responsibilities that come with the Thornfield name." Victoria's gaze found Kate in the crowd, her smile warm and approving. "Someone raised in our world, who shares our values and traditions." Sarah's hands began to tremble. Around her, she could feel the shift in the crowd's energy, the way conversations quieted as people strained to hear every word. "But young people today seem determined to learn from their own mistakes," Victoria continued, her voice carrying the indulgent tone one might use with a rebellious teenager. "I suppose all we can do is hope that time and experience will guide them back to wisdom." The speech continued for another 5 minutes, each word carefully chosen to humiliate Sarah while maintaining plausible deniability. Victoria never directly insulted her future daughter-in-law, but the message was clear to everyone present. This engagement was a temporary lapse in judgment that would soon be corrected. When Victoria finally finished speaking, the applause was polite but uncertain. Sarah stood frozen as people approached to offer congratulations that felt more like condolences, their smiles pitying and embarrassed. "Such an interesting choice," one woman murmured. "You're very brave," another whispered, as if Sarah were facing a terminal diagnosis. Michael found Sarah on the terrace afterward, staring out at the dark water with tears streaming down her face. His own expression was a mixture of fury and shame, the look of a man who'd watched his mother destroy the woman he loved and been powerless to stop it. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she would—" "Yes, you did," Sarah interrupted, her voice hollow. "Maybe not exactly this, but you knew she'd never accept me. You knew your whole world would see me as the waitress who got above herself." "I don't care what they think." Sarah turned to face him, moonlight catching the tears on her cheeks. "But you do care. I can see it in your eyes, Michael. You're starting to wonder if they're right." "That's not true." "Isn't it? When was the last time you defended me to your mother? When was the last time you told Kate to leave us alone? You keep saying you love me, but you won't fight for me. You won't fight for us." Michael reached for her hands, but she stepped back, the engagement ring catching the light like a mockery of their dreams. "I am fighting for us. This party, introducing you to everyone." "This party was a public execution," Sarah said quietly. "Your mother just humiliated me in front of 100 people, and you're acting like it was a misunderstanding." The truth hung between them like a chasm. Michael was a good man, a loving man, but he was also a man who'd been trained from birth to avoid conflict, to maintain appearances, to preserve family harmony at all costs. He loved Sarah, but he loved his family too, and when forced to choose between them, he consistently chose the path of least resistance. "What do you want me to do?" Michael asked, and the defeat in his voice told Sarah everything she needed to know. "I want you to choose," she said simply. "Me or them, us or your inheritance, love or comfort. But I can't keep being the dirty secret you're ashamed to claim in public." Michael's silence stretched for so long that Sarah felt her heart breaking in real time. When he finally spoke, his words were barely audible over the sound of waves against the shore. "You're not being fair. It's not that simple." But it was that simple, Sarah realized. It had always been that simple. Love either conquered all or it conquered nothing. There was no middle ground in a war for someone's soul. She slipped the engagement ring from her finger, the diamond feeling cold and foreign in her palm. "I love you, Michael. I'll always love you. But I won't spend my life fighting for a place in your world when you won't fight to make me a place in your heart. Sarah, please." She pressed the ring into his hand and walked away, leaving him standing alone on the terrace with the ruins of their fairy tale scattered around his feet. Behind them, the party continued, the string quartet playing love songs for a couple who'd just discovered that sometimes love wasn't enough. The drive back to Millbrook felt like a funeral procession. Sarah's phone buzzed with texts from Michael, apologies, explanations, desperate pleas for another chance. But she didn't read them. She couldn't. Reading them would only make her want to turn around, to accept the crumbs he was offering, to spend her life fighting battles she could never win. By the time she reached her apartment, Sarah had made a decision that would have shocked the girl who'd fallen in love 6 months ago. She was going to disappear, not because Victoria had bought her off, but because sometimes love meant knowing when to let go. The war for Michael Thornfield's soul was over, and everyone had lost. The wedding invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock so thick it felt like armor, embossed with gold lettering that announced the union of Michael James Thornfield and Catherine Elizabeth Pemberton. Sarah held it with trembling fingers, reading her own name written in elegant calligraphy among the guests. A final twist of the knife from Victoria, who clearly wanted to ensure Sarah witnessed her complete victory. 3 months had passed since the engagement party disaster. 3 months of silence from Michael, of rebuilding the walls around her heart, of trying to convince herself that love sometimes meant letting go. Sarah had thrown herself into work at the diner and her volunteer shifts at the children's center, hoping that helping others might fill the hollow space Michael had left behind. But seeing the invitation, seeing his name next to Kate's, brought all the pain rushing back like a flood through a broken dam. Ruth Murphy found Sarah crying in the diner's storage room, the invitation crumpled in her fist like a broken promise. "Oh, honey," Ruth whispered, pulling Sarah into a motherly embrace that smelled of coffee and comfort. "You don't have to go. Nobody would blame you for staying away." "I have to," Sarah choked out between sobs. "I have to see it end. I have to know it's really over." What Sarah couldn't tell Ruth, what she could barely admit to herself, was that part of her still hoped, still believed that when the moment came, when the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, Michael would remember what they'd had together, would remember love that had felt like coming home. The wedding was set for St. Augustine's Cathedral in Greenwich, a Gothic monument to old money and older traditions. Sarah bought a simple black dress from the thrift store, the only appropriate attire for attending the funeral of her own dreams. She drove to Connecticut in her aging Honda, feeling like a sparrow flying into a hurricane. The cathedral was packed with Connecticut's elite, senators and CEOs, old money families whose names graced museum wings and university buildings. Sarah slipped into a back pew, anonymous among the glittering crowd, watching as ushers seated guests according to their importance in the Thornfield universe. Kate was radiant in a way that money could buy and maintain. A Vera Wang gown that probably cost more than Sarah made in 2 years, diamonds that caught the cathedral's stained glass light like captured rainbows. She floated down the aisle on her father's arm, smiling serenely at the man waiting for her at the altar. Michael stood straight and handsome in his mourning coat, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the forced quality of his smile. This wasn't the man who'd laughed with her over pie at Murphy's Diner or held her while she grieved their lost baby. This was a stranger playing a role, fulfilling expectations that had been set for him since birth. The ceremony proceeded with the pomp befitting Connecticut royalty. Father Benedict Morrison, who'd baptized 3 generations of Thornfields, spoke of duty and tradition, of families joining together in holy matrimony. But Sarah noticed what was missing. Any mention of love, of passion, of 2 souls choosing each other against all odds. When Father Morrison reached the traditional question, if any person here present knows of any lawful impediment why these persons may not be joined together in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The cathedral fell silent except for the thundering of Sarah's heart. She wanted to stand up. God help her, she wanted to rise from that back pew and declare that this was wrong, that Michael was marrying the wrong woman, that love should triumph over duty. But her voice remained locked in her throat, paralyzed by the knowledge that speaking would only humiliate them both. The moment passed. Father Morrison continued with the vows, and Sarah felt her last hope die as Michael repeated words about loving and honoring a woman who represented everything safe and expected in his world. But then something unexpected happened. As Kate began her vows, her voice clear and confident in the cathedral's perfect acoustics, Michael's gaze drifted over the congregation. Sarah saw the exact moment when his eyes found hers in the back pew, saw the shock, the pain, the desperate longing that crossed his features like a summer storm. Kate continued speaking, promising to love and cherish, to be a worthy partner in the life they would build together. But Michael wasn't listening. He was staring at Sarah with the expression of a drowning man who'd spotted shore, his face pale beneath his wedding day tan. "Michael?" Father Morrison prompted gently. "Your vows?" Michael blinked, seeming to remember where he was. He looked down at Kate, so beautiful and appropriate, everything his family had ever wanted for him. Then his gaze found Sarah again, and she saw him make a choice that would change everything. "I can't," he said quietly. The words were barely audible, but in the cathedral's acoustics, they carried to every corner of the massive space. A murmur rippled through the congregation like wind through wheat. "I'm sorry," Michael said louder, his voice gaining strength. "Kate, I'm so sorry, but I can't do this." Kate's face cycled through confusion, embarrassment, and finally fury as the meaning of his words penetrated. "Michael, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I can't marry you when I'm in love with someone else." The cathedral erupted. Victoria shot to her feet, her face white with rage and humiliation. Richard Thornfield Sr. looked like he might have a stroke. Guests whipped out phones to capture the social catastrophe unfolding before their eyes. But Michael only had eyes for Sarah. He stepped away from the altar, leaving Kate standing alone in her $1,000 gown, and walked down the aisle toward the woman who'd captured his heart in a diner in Ohio. "Sarah," he said, when he reached her pew, his voice breaking with emotion. "I thought you weren't coming. I thought I'd lost you forever." Sarah's own voice was barely a whisper. "You chose her. You chose them." "I chose wrong," Michael said, dropping to one knee right there in the cathedral aisle, oblivious to the chaos erupting around them. "I've been choosing wrong for months, trying to make everyone happy instead of following my heart." Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore, I love you. I choose you. Will you give me another chance? The scene was pure scandal. A groom abandoning his bride for the waitress in the back pew, old money watching in horror as their carefully ordered world crumbled. Camera phones flashed like paparazzi lightning, capturing every moment for social media posterity. Sarah looked at Michael kneeling before her, saw the love and desperation in his eyes, the way he'd finally found the courage to fight for what mattered. But she also saw the wreckage around them, Kate weeping at the altar, Victoria's face twisted with fury, a congregation of Connecticut's most powerful families witnessing the destruction of decades of careful planning. "Get up," Sarah said quietly. "Please. You're making a scene." "I don't care about scenes anymore," Michael said fiercely. "I care about you. I care about us. I should have fought for you months ago, should have told my mother where she could put her money and her threats. I should have chosen love over everything else." Victoria's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Security! Remove that woman from this cathedral immediately!" But Michael stood up, placing himself between Sarah and the approaching security guards. "Don't touch her," he warned, his voice carrying an authority Sarah had never heard before. "She's here as my guest. She's here as a home wrecker." Victoria spat, her careful composure finally cracking. "She's destroyed our family, ruined Kate's wedding, made us all a laughingstock." "No, Mother," Michael interrupted, his voice steady and strong. "I did that. I made these choices. I ruined this wedding because I was about to marry the wrong woman for all the wrong reasons." Kate finally found her voice, her tears making mascara tracks down her perfect cheeks. "How could you do this to me, Michael, in front of everyone?" Michael's expression softened with genuine remorse. "Kate, I'm sorry. You deserve better than this, better than a man who could never love you the way you deserve to be loved. You deserve someone who looks at you the way I look at her." He gestured to Sarah, who stood frozen in the eye of the hurricane, unsure whether to run or stay, whether to trust this moment or protect herself from another heartbreak. The cathedral was in complete chaos now. Some guests were fleeing toward the exits, unwilling to witness more scandal. Others were recording everything, already composing social media posts that would make this wedding the talk of Connecticut society for years to come. The Pemberton family had gathered around Kate, shooting murderous looks at Michael and Sarah. Father Morrison, clearly out of his depth with this particular pastoral crisis, was trying to restore order. "Perhaps we should all take a moment to collect ourselves." "There's nothing to collect," Richard Thornfield Sr. boomed, his voice echoing off the cathedral's stone walls. "Michael, you will proceed with this wedding, or you will be cut off from this family permanently. No inheritance, no trust fund, no company position, nothing." The ultimatum hung in the air like a sword. Everyone waited to see which Michael would choose, the heir to a billion-dollar empire or the man who'd fallen in love with a waitress in Ohio. Michael looked at his father, then at his mother, then at the ruins of the life they'd planned for him. Finally, his gaze settled on Sarah, and his choice was written clearly on his face. "Then I choose nothing," he said simply. "I choose love." Sarah felt her knees go weak. After months of fighting, months of being told she wasn't good enough, months of watching Michael struggle between two worlds, he was finally, definitively, choosing her. But even as her heart soared, her practical mind was calculating the cost. Michael was giving up everything, his inheritance, his family, his entire future, for her. The weight of that sacrifice felt crushing. "Michael," she whispered, "you don't know what you're doing. Your family, your company, everything you've worked for." "I know exactly what I'm doing," he said, taking her hands in his. "I'm choosing the only thing that matters. I'm choosing us." Victoria's scream of rage was heard 3 blocks away. The society wedding of the year had become the society scandal of the decade. and Sarah Whitmore, the poor girl from Ohio who dared to love above her station, stood at the center of it all, trying to decide whether to trust in fairy tales one more time. The cathedral bells had fallen silent, but Sarah's heart was ringing like a symphony. The question was whether love would be enough to survive what came next. The aftermath of the ruined wedding unfolded like a series of bombs detonating across Connecticut society. Within hours, videos of Michael abandoning Kate at the altar had gone viral, shared across social media platforms with hashtags like #weddingfail and #lovewins. The comment sections became battlegrounds between those who called it romantic and those who branded it a disgrace. Sarah and Michael fled the cathedral hand in hand, running through a gauntlet of camera phones and shouted questions from society reporters who'd expected to cover a boring wedding and instead witnessed the social event of the decade. They escaped in Michael's Porsche, leaving behind a cathedral full of chaos and a bride in ruins. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, as Michael drove with no apparent destination, his wedding attire disheveled, his face pale but determined. "Away," he said simply. "Somewhere we can think, somewhere they can't find us." They ended up at a roadside motel in rural Connecticut, the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions. Michael paid cash while Sarah waited in the car, both of them still wearing the clothes they'd chosen for his wedding to another woman. The room was small and shabby, with faded carpet and a window air conditioner that rattled like a dying engine. But when Michael closed the door behind them, shutting out the world and its judgments, it felt like sanctuary. For a long moment, they simply stood looking at each other, the magnitude of what had just happened settling over them like dust after an explosion. "I can't believe you did that," Sarah whispered. "I can't believe it took me so long," Michael replied, reaching for her hands. "Sarah, I've spent the last 3 months in hell trying to convince myself I could live without you. Trying to be the son my parents wanted instead of the man I am. Your family will never forgive you. You've lost everything." Michael's smile was sad but genuine. "I haven't lost anything that mattered. Money comes and goes. Trust funds can be rebuilt. But you, Sarah, there's only one you in the world, and I was about to throw away my only chance at happiness for the approval of people who will never understand what love really means." They made love that afternoon in the shabby motel room, with traffic humming past the window and the sound of their phones buzzing with ignored calls. It was desperate and beautiful and felt like a resurrection. Two people choosing each other against impossible odds, declaring their love in defiance of a world that had tried to tear them apart. Afterward, they lay tangled in cheap sheets, talking about the future they might build together. Michael spoke of starting over, of finding work that mattered, of building something real instead of inheriting something hollow. Sarah talked about her dreams for the children's home, about making a difference in young lives the way her grandmother had made a difference in hers. But reality intruded with the persistence of water through a cracked foundation. Michael's phone had accumulated dozens of missed calls from his parents, from lawyers, from business associates, from reporters seeking statements. Sarah's phone was quieter, but the few messages she'd received painted a grim picture of the chaos they'd left behind. Kate Pemberton had been hospitalized for what her family diplomatically called exhaustion, though rumors suggested a complete nervous breakdown. The Pemberton family was threatening lawsuits for emotional distress and public humiliation. Victoria Thornfield had issued a statement disowning her son and expressing her deepest apologies to the Pembertons for Michael's temporary mental breakdown. The financial consequences began immediately. Richard Thornfield Sr. made good on his threats, freezing Michael's access to trust funds and company accounts. By evening, Michael's credit cards were being declined, his corporate phone disconnected, his name removed from the Thornfield Industries website. 29 years old, and I don't even have a checking account that's really mine, Michael said bitterly, staring at his disabled phone. I've been so insulated by family money that I don't even know how to apply for a job. Sarah took his hand, her calloused fingers intertwining with his soft ones. We'll figure it out. People survive without trust funds every day. I've been doing it my whole life. But even as she spoke the words, Sarah felt the weight of what they'd taken on. Michael had grown up in a world where problems were solved with money, where comfort was a given, where the concept of choosing between groceries and rent was as foreign as life on another planet. He was brave and sincere in his love for her, but love couldn't pay bills or put food on the table. They returned to Millbrook the next day, driving through town in Michael's Porsche, now probably the most expensive thing he owned, while residents peered through curtains and whispered on street corners. The wedding scandal had made national news, and sleepy Millbrook suddenly found itself hosting reporters and photographers hoping to capture the next chapter of the story. Ruth Murphy met them at the diner with a mixture of sympathy and concern. "Honey," she said to Sarah, "you know I love you like a daughter, but this attention isn't good for business. I've had reporters in here all morning asking questions about you and offering money for stories." Sarah's heart sank. She'd already cost Ruth enough trouble with the health inspections and anonymous complaints. Now she was bringing tabloid attention to the one place that had always been her refuge. "I understand if you need me to quit," Sarah said quietly. Ruth's expression softened. "I didn't say that. I said it's complicated. Let's take things one day at a time." Michael tried to help at the diner, but his efforts were more endearing than effective. He'd never waited tables, never operated a commercial coffee machine, never dealt with the controlled chaos of a busy lunch rush. Watching him struggle with tasks that were second nature to Sarah, she began to understand the true scope of the challenge they faced. The first night in Sarah's studio apartment was eye-opening for both of them. Michael, accustomed to a bedroom the size of most people's entire homes, found himself in a space barely large enough for a bed, a small table, and a kitchenette. The radiator clanged like a dying animal, the neighbor's television bled through thin walls, and the bathroom was down the hall, shared with 3 other tenants. "It's cozy," Michael said gamely, trying to hide his culture shock. "It's tiny," Sarah replied honestly, "and it's all I can afford on what I make at the diner. Are you sure you can live like this?" Michael pulled her close, his arms strong and sure around her. "I can live anywhere as long as it's with you." But the romantic declaration couldn't overcome practical realities. Michael's job search proved more difficult than either of them had anticipated. His Ivy League education and family connections meant nothing when those same connections were now working against him. Word had spread through Connecticut's business community that Michael Thornfield was persona non grata, a young man who'd publicly humiliated one of the state's most prominent families and couldn't be trusted with responsibility or discretion. Sarah watched Michael's confidence erode day by day as rejection letters accumulated and phone calls went unreturned. The man who'd once commanded boardrooms was reduced to applying for entry-level positions at companies that wouldn't even grant him interviews. The media attention intensified their isolation. Reporters camped outside Sarah's apartment building, shouting questions whenever they appeared. Tabloid photographers with telephoto lenses captured their every move, turning simple errands into exercises in avoiding publicity. The local grocery store manager asked them to shop elsewhere after other customers complained about the circus following them through the aisles. 3 weeks after the wedding disaster, Victoria Thornfield made her move. The knock on Sarah's door came at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. Sarah opened it expecting Michael, who'd gone to the library to search job listings on their computers, but instead found Victoria standing in the dingy hallway like a predator in a palace. Victoria had aged in the weeks since the wedding. Her perfect composure showed cracks. Her usually flawless makeup couldn't quite hide the exhaustion around her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her designer purse. "May I come in?" Victoria asked, her voice lacking its usual imperial authority. Sarah stepped aside, watching as Victoria surveyed the tiny apartment with undisguised dismay. The contrast between Victoria's couture suit and the shabby surroundings was stark, two worlds colliding in a space barely large enough to contain them both. "You've certainly brought my son down in the world," Victoria said, settling gingerly onto Sarah's second-hand couch. "Michael made his own choices," Sarah replied, remaining standing. "Did he? Or did you manipulate a lonely, emotionally vulnerable man into destroying his life for your benefit?" The accusation hit like a physical blow, partly because it echoed Sarah's own secret fears. Had she been selfish in accepting Michael's sacrifice? Had love blinded her to the magnitude of what he was giving up? "I never asked him to leave you," Sarah said quietly. "I walked away, remember? I gave him back the ring." "Yes, very noble, very calculated." Victoria's laugh was bitter. "You knew he'd come after you. You knew that walking away would only make him want you more. It's the oldest trick in the book. Make yourself unattainable and watch men destroy themselves trying to possess you. That's not what happened, isn't it?" Victoria leaned forward, her eyes glittering with unshed tears. "Look around you, Sarah. Look at what you've reduced him to. A man worth nearly $1 billion is now living in a slum, applying for jobs that don't exist, having his every move photographed like a circus freak. Is this the life you dreamed of giving him?" Sarah's throat tightened. Every word Victoria spoke matched the guilt that had been growing inside her like a cancer. She'd seen Michael's frustration, his confusion at navigating a world he'd never had to understand. She'd watched him struggle with problems that had never existed in his privileged life. "He's happy," Sarah said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "For now." But what happens when the novelty wears off? When he realizes that love doesn't pay rent or put food on the table? When he starts resenting you for the life he gave up? Victoria's voice softened with what might have been genuine emotion. "I've seen it happen before, Sarah. Love is beautiful, but it's not enough. Not when the differences are this vast." Victoria reached into her purse and withdrew a check, placing it on Sarah's coffee table with the reverence of someone handling a religious artifact. Sarah could see the amount even from across the room. $1 million, more money than she could earn in 20 lifetimes. "This is my final offer," Victoria said. "Take this money and disappear. Start your children's home somewhere far away. Give Michael a chance to rebuild his life before it's too late." Sarah stared at the check, her mind racing with possibilities. $1 million would fund her dreams beyond her wildest imagination. She could help hundreds of children, maybe thousands. She could build something lasting and meaningful, something that would honor her grandmother's memory and make a real difference in the world. All she had to do was break her own heart one more time. "He'll never forgive me if I leave now," Sarah whispered. "He'll never forgive you if you stay and let him lose everything," Victoria countered. "Love isn't just about wanting someone, Sarah. Sometimes it's about wanting what's best for them, even when it destroys you." The check lay on the table between them like a poisonous flower, beautiful and deadly. Sarah could almost see the children's home it could build, the young lives it could transform, the legacy it could create. But she could also see Michael's face when he came home to find her gone, could imagine his pain and confusion at another abandonment. "I need time to think," Sarah said finally. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt with hands that barely trembled. "You have until tomorrow night. After that, the offer expires, and you'll have to live with whatever consequences follow." After Victoria left, Sarah sat alone in her tiny apartment, staring at the check that represented everything she'd ever dreamed of and everything she'd have to sacrifice to obtain it. Outside her window, she could see reporters keeping their vigil, waiting for the next chapter in a story that had already cost too much. When Michael returned an hour later, his face bright with the first good news he'd had in weeks, a potential job interview at a small accounting firm, Sarah forced herself to smile and listen to his excitement. But inside, Victoria's words echoed like a funeral bell. Sometimes love meant wanting what was best for someone, even when it destroyed you. The choice that would determine both their futures lay on the coffee table like a sleeping serpent, waiting for dawn. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. She lay beside Michael in the narrow bed, listening to his peaceful breathing while Victoria's check burned like a beacon from the coffee table across the room. $1 million. Enough to change everything, to build the children's home she'd dreamed of since she was a lonely 8-year-old girl who'd lost everything. But taking it would mean losing Michael forever. At 3 in the morning, Sarah slipped from bed and padded to the window, staring out at the empty street where a lone reporter still maintained his vigil, coffee cup steaming in the cool night air. How had her life become a story that strangers felt entitled to follow and judge? "Can't sleep?" Michael's voice was soft from the bed. Sarah turned, seeing him propped on one elbow, his dark hair tousled, his eyes concerned. "Just thinking. About us. About everything." Sarah returned to bed, settling into his arms with the desperate tenderness of someone who knew their time might be running out. "Michael, are you happy? Really happy?" "I'm with you," he said simply. "That's all I need." But Sarah had seen the frustration in his eyes when his job applications were rejected, had watched him struggle with the simplest aspects of their new life together. Love might be enough for fairy tales, but real life demanded more than romance to survive. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Ruth Murphy appeared at Sarah's door at 7 a.m., her face grim with the kind of expression that preceded life-altering revelations. "Honey, you need to see something." She handed Sarah a newspaper. Not the local Millbrook Weekly, but the Connecticut Post, whose front page featured a photograph that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was Michael and Kate at the ski lodge last Christmas, but this wasn't the innocent picture Kate had shown her months ago. This image captured them kissing, Michael's arms wrapped around Kate with unmistakable intimacy. The headline screamed, "Billionaire's Son's Secret Affair." Was the runaway groom playing both women? Sarah's hands shook as she read the article, each word feeling like a knife thrust. According to sources close to the Thornfield family, Michael had been involved with Kate throughout his relationship with Sarah. The article painted him as a spoiled rich boy who'd been amusing himself with a small-town waitress while maintaining his real relationship with his social equal. He told Kate the waitress was just a phase, the article quoted an anonymous source. He said he needed to get it out of his system before settling down with someone appropriate. The story included text messages allegedly from Michael to Kate, messages that spoke of missing her, of the complications Sarah was causing, of his intention to end things with the Ohio girl after the holidays. Sarah read every damning word twice, her heart breaking a little more with each revelation. By the time Michael emerged from the bathroom, toweling his hair, she was sitting at the small table with the newspaper spread before her like evidence at a trial. "What's wrong?" Michael asked, then saw the paper. His face went white. "Sarah, that's not... Whatever that says, it's not true." "These text messages," Sarah said quietly, pointing to the screenshots embedded in the article. "Did you send these to Kate?" Michael leaned over to read, his expression growing increasingly horrified. "Some of them, but not like this. They're taken out of context, edited to make it sound like, 'Sarah, you have to believe me. I never called you a phase. I never planned to end things with you for Kate." "But you did miss her," Sarah observed, her voice unnaturally calm. "You did find our relationship complicated." "Yes, but not because I wanted to be with her. Because I was scared of losing my family, scared of choosing between two worlds. I was confused and conflicted, but I never betrayed you." Sarah wanted to believe him. Looking into his eyes, seeing his desperation and pain, part of her did believe him. But doubt had taken root, fed by months of attacks on her worthiness, months of being told she didn't belong in his world. "How many other things haven't you told me?" she asked. "How many other complications are going to come out in the newspapers?" Before Michael could answer, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, the voice was unmistakable. "Miss Whitmore, this is Janet Chen from Good Morning America. We'd like to offer you an exclusive interview about your relationship with Michael Thornfield. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for your story." Sarah hung up without responding, but the phone immediately rang again. A different reporter, a different show, the same invasive hunger for details about her private pain. "Turn it off," Michael said, reaching for the phone. "Don't answer any of them." But the calls kept coming, to Sarah's phone, to the diner, to neighbors in her building. Reporters had apparently obtained every number even tangentially connected to her life. Outside, the crowd of media had doubled overnight, their cameras trained on her window like artillery aimed at her soul. By noon, Sarah felt like a prisoner in her own apartment. Every attempt to leave brought a barrage of shouted questions and camera flashes. Michael tried to shield her, but his presence only intensified the feeding frenzy. "Sarah, is it true you knew about Kate? Michael, are you planning to reconcile with your family? How much money did Victoria Thornfield offer you to leave?" That last question, shouted by a particularly aggressive tabloid reporter, made Sarah stumble. How did they know about Victoria's offer? Had someone been watching the apartment, recording their conversation? The revelation came that evening in the form of a phone call from Victoria herself. "I assume you've seen today's news?" Victoria said without preamble when Sarah answered. "You released those text messages," Sarah accused. "I released what was necessary to make you understand the truth of your situation. Michael will always be torn between two worlds as long as you're in his life. You represent chaos, Sarah. Uncertainty. The kind of disruption that destroys everything it touches. You're destroying him yourself," Sarah shot back. "Your own son. I'm saving him from making a mistake he'll regret for the rest of his life." Victoria's voice carried a weariness that surprised Sarah. "I was in love once too, you know. Desperately, foolishly in love with a man who was completely wrong for me. I thought love could conquer anything, that happiness was worth any sacrifice." Sarah found herself listening despite her anger, hearing something raw and vulnerable in Victoria's voice. "What happened?" "He left me," Victoria said simply. "Not for money or family pressure, but because he realized that love isn't enough when two people are fundamentally incompatible. I spent years trying to become someone I wasn't, trying to fit into his world, and in the end, I lost both him and myself." The story hung between them, a cautionary tale wrapped in expensive silk and bitter experience. "The check is still on your table," Victoria continued. "Tomorrow it will be withdrawn, and you'll be left with nothing but a man who will eventually resent you for everything he gave up. Choose wisely, Sarah. This is your last chance to choose love over selfishness." That night, Sarah and Michael sat in their tiny apartment surrounded by the ruins of their fairy tale. The media circus showed no signs of abating. Michael's job prospects had evaporated in the wake of the latest scandal, and their relationship felt like a house built on sand during an earthquake. "We could leave," Michael said desperately. "Go somewhere they can't find us. Start over completely." Running away doesn't solve anything, Sarah replied. The problems would follow us. Your family, the media, the fact that you've given up everything for me, none of that disappears just because we change our zip code. Michael took her hands, his grip almost painful in its intensity. Sarah, I love you. I know this is hard. I know it's not what either of us imagined, but we can get through this. Love is worth fighting for. Is it? Sarah pulled her hands free, walking to the window where cameras still flashed in the darkness below. Look at us, Michael. Really look. We're hiding in a tiny apartment like fugitives. You can't get a job because of me. I can't go to work without being harassed. Your family hates me, my community has turned against me, and now the whole world thinks I'm some kind of homewrecker who manipulated you into destroying your life. I don't care what they think. But I do, Sarah said, the admission tearing from her throat like a confession. I care that your mother looks at me like I'm something she scraped off her shoe. I care that Kate had a nervous breakdown because of what we did. I care that there are children who need help, who could benefit from resources that are sitting on my coffee table, and I'm too selfish to take them. Sarah walked to the table and picked up Victoria's check, staring at the numbers that represented both salvation and damnation. $1 million, Michael? Do you know how many children I could help with this money? How many lives I could change? You'd be selling your soul, Michael said quietly. Would I? Or would I be finally putting someone else's needs before my own desires? Sarah turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. Maybe your mother is right. Maybe love isn't enough when it comes at such a cost. Sarah, please. No, she interrupted, her voice growing stronger with resolve. I've been thinking about this all day, all week, all month. We've been so focused on fighting for our right to love each other that we haven't stopped to consider whether we should. Michael's face crumpled with understanding and terror. You're going to leave me. I'm going to set you free, Sarah said, folding the check with steady hands. You gave up everything for me, Michael. Your family, your inheritance, your future. I can't let you sacrifice anymore. That was my choice to make. And this is mine. Sarah moved to her small closet, pulling out the suitcase she'd bought at a thrift store years ago. I'm going to take this money and disappear. I'm going to build something good with it, something that helps children who need it more than I need happiness. Sarah, no. We can figure this out. We can find another way. But Sarah had already made her decision, had perhaps been making it since the moment Victoria placed that check on her table. Love might conquer all in fairy tales, but real life demanded harder choices, more painful sacrifices. Go back to your family, she said, packing her few possessions with methodical precision. Apologize to Kate. Make peace with your parents. Rebuild your life. Find someone who fits in your world. Someone who won't cost you everything to love. I don't want someone else. I want you. Sarah stopped packing and looked at him one last time, memorizing his face, the way the lamplight caught his dark hair, the love and desperation in his eyes. Sometimes wanting isn't enough, she said softly. Sometimes love means letting go. She kissed him goodbye, tasting salt and sorrow, then picked up her suitcase and walked toward the door. Behind her, Michael called her name, pleaded with her to stay, promised that they could make it work. But Sarah kept walking, stepping out into the night where camera flashes exploded like fireworks and reporters shouted questions she would never answer. And she had made her choice, not for money, not for convenience, but for love itself. Sometimes the greatest act of love was knowing when to walk away. The war was over and everyone had lost. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you'd sacrifice everything for them, only to realize that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting them go? Sarah's story reminds us that life's most painful decisions often come wrapped in love's purest intentions. As we navigate our golden years, we understand that true happiness isn't found in holding tight to what we want, but in having the wisdom to recognize what's truly best for those we cherish most. Sarah chose to walk away not because she loved Michael less, but because she loved him enough to want his complete happiness, even if it meant her own heartbreak. This is the kind of selfless love that defines us as we mature, the understanding that sometimes our greatest gift to others is our absence, not our presence. In our 55-plus years of living, we've learned that real joy comes from building something meaningful from our pain, from transforming our sacrifices into legacies that outlast our temporary happiness. Sarah's choice to use that $1 million to help children honors every grandparent's dream of leaving the world better than we found it. What's the most selfless decision you've made for love? Have you ever had to choose between your happiness and someone else's future? Share your story in the comments below. Your wisdom might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. The months following Sarah's departure passed like scenes from someone else's life. Michael found himself caught between two versions of reality, the one where he searched frantically for the woman he loved, and the one where he slowly, reluctantly, began to rebuild the life he'd abandoned. Sarah had vanished completely. No forwarding address, no social media presence, no trace of where she'd gone or what she'd done with Victoria's money. Michael hired private investigators, followed every lead, drove to neighboring states chasing rumors and false sightings. But Sarah Whitmore had disappeared as thoroughly as if she'd never existed. The media eventually moved on to fresher scandals, leaving Michael to navigate his return to his family's world with the awkwardness of a prodigal son who wasn't entirely welcome back. Victoria accepted his presence with cool civility, never mentioning Sarah's name, but wearing the satisfied expression of a general who'd won a costly victory. Richard Sr. reinstated Michael's access to company accounts and trust funds, but their relationship remained strained, professional rather than paternal. Kate Pemberton recovered from her breakdown with the resilience of someone bred for public life. She accepted Michael's apologies with grace, even attended social events where they were photographed together, though anyone with eyes could see the careful distance she maintained. The society pages speculated about reconciliation, but Kate's smiles never quite reached her eyes anymore. Winter in Connecticut passed in a blur of board meetings and charity galas, of Michael going through the motions of his predetermined life while feeling like an actor playing a role he'd outgrown. He excelled at his work, throwing himself into business deals with the kind of desperate energy that impressed his father and worried the few friends perceptive enough to see beyond his professional success. Spring brought unexpected developments. Michael was reviewing quarterly reports in his corner office when his assistant knocked, her expression unusually excited. "Mr. Thornfield, there's a reporter here from the Hartford Courant. She says she has information about Sarah Whitmore." Michael's heart stopped. In 6 months, this was the first legitimate lead he'd received. "Send her in." Jennifer Walsh was a seasoned journalist in her 50s, the kind of reporter who specialized in human interest stories that revealed deeper truths about society. She settled into the chair across from Michael's desk with the confidence of someone who held cards worth playing. "Mr. Thornfield, I've been investigating a remarkable story about a new children's home that opened in rural Vermont last month. The Whitmore Foundation is already making headlines for its innovative approach to caring for orphaned and abandoned children." Michael's breath caught. "Sarah?" The director prefers to remain anonymous, but public records show the foundation was established with a substantial donation, exactly $1 million. "The timing coincides perfectly with your former fiancé's disappearance." Jennifer placed a folder on Michael's desk, her expression both professional and sympathetic. "I thought you might want to see what she's building with that money." The photographs were like glimpses into a dream Michael had shared with Sarah, but never thought would materialize. A converted farmhouse surrounded by green fields, children's laughter captured in still images, gardens where kids learned to grow their own food. The Whitmore Foundation wasn't just a children's home. It was a complete community, offering education, therapy, life skills training, and most importantly, the kind of unconditional love Sarah had never received after her parents died. She's helping 43 children so far, Jennifer continued. Kids from broken homes, aging out of foster care, situations where they might otherwise fall through the cracks. The staff calls her Miss Sarah, and according to everyone I interviewed, she works 18-hour days and hasn't taken a single day off since opening. Michael studied a photograph of Sarah kneeling in a garden beside a young boy, both of them covered in soil and grinning at the camera. She looked older, thinner, but there was something in her expression he'd never seen before. Complete fulfillment, the peace that came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged. "Where in Vermont?" he asked quietly. Jennifer hesitated. "Mr. Thornfield, I didn't come here to help you find her. I came because I'm writing a story about extraordinary people who transform tragedy into triumph. Sarah Whitmore is one of the most remarkable women I've ever encountered, and after talking to her, I understand why she needed to disappear completely. She talked to you about me. She talked about sacrifice, about love that's big enough to let go, about building something beautiful from the ashes of your own dreams." Jennifer's voice softened. She also made it very clear that her past is exactly that, past. She's not the woman who fell in love with a billionaire's son anymore. She's someone else entirely. Someone who's found her purpose in healing children who've been wounded the way she was. Michael set down the photographs, his hands trembling slightly. "Is she happy?" "She's at peace," Jennifer replied, "which might be more important than happiness." After the reporter left, Michael sat alone in his office, staring at the images of Sarah's new life. Everything he'd known about love, sacrifice, and redemption was being rewritten by a woman who'd chosen children's laughter over her own joy. That evening, Michael made a decision that would have surprised his younger self. He drove to Kate Pemberton's family estate, not to rekindle their relationship, but to have the honest conversation they'd never managed before. Kate received him in her father's study, elegant in a way that no longer stirred his heart, but which he could appreciate objectively. "I saw the article about Sarah," Kate said before Michael could speak. "The children's home in Vermont." "You're not surprised?" Kate's smile was sad but genuine. "I'm many things, Michael, but I'm not blind. I always knew Sarah was extraordinary. That's why I hated her so much, not because she was beneath you, but because she was exactly what you needed and I never could be." They talked for hours that night, two people who'd been shaped by their family's expectations, finally acknowledging the truth about their relationship. Kate admitted she'd orchestrated much of the media campaign against Sarah, driven by jealousy and the terror of losing a future she'd been promised since childhood. Michael confessed that he'd proposed to Sarah partly as rebellion against the life mapped out for him, but had ended up discovering what real love actually meant. She saved you, you know," Kate said as they walked through her family's garden in the moonlight. "Not from me or your family, but from becoming someone you'd hate. You were already turning into your father before you met her. And now? Now you're the man she saw when she fell in love with you. The question is, what you're going to do with that gift." Michael spent the summer wrestling with that question. He threw himself into Thornfield Industries with new purpose, but instead of simply maximizing profits, he began pushing for corporate responsibility initiatives. He established scholarship programs for children aging out of foster care, funded literacy programs in underserved communities, and quietly began transforming his family's business into something that would have made Sarah proud. The changes didn't go unnoticed. Richard Sr. questioned his son's new priorities. wondering aloud if Michael was trying to salve his conscience by giving away company profits. Victoria watched her son's transformation with a mixture of pride and concern, recognizing that the obedient heir she'd fought to preserve was evolving into something she couldn't control. But it was a letter that arrived in September that truly changed everything. The envelope was addressed in careful handwriting to Mr. Michael Thornfield, with no return address, postmarked from a town Michael didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in a child's drawing, stick figures holding hands around a house with flowers in the windows and a sun smiling down from a blue sky. The note attached was brief. "Mr. Michael, Miss Sarah told us about you. She said you're the kind of person who understands that love means wanting the best for someone even when it hurts. Thank you for loving her enough to let her love us. Your friend, Emma, age 8. Michael stared at the drawing for a long time, seeing in those simple stick figures the life Sarah had chosen over the life they'd dreamed of together. A child had drawn this picture, a child who was being raised with love and stability because Sarah had been brave enough to sacrifice her own happiness for something larger than herself. That night, Michael made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He withdrew from his personal accounts the exact amount Victoria had paid Sarah, $1 million, and had it transferred anonymously to the Whitmore Foundation. But instead of stopping there, he established a trust that would continue funding the foundation in perpetuity, ensuring that Sarah's work would never be limited by financial constraints. He didn't do it to win her back or earn her gratitude. He did it because Emma's drawing had shown him what love really looked like when it grew up, not the passionate, consuming fire he'd felt for Sarah, but the steady, nurturing flame that warmed other people's lives. On the first anniversary of their wedding that never happened, Michael received another package. This time it contained a photograph of 43 children and their caregivers standing in front of a newly constructed education building. A bronze plaque beside the door read, "The Michael J. Thornfield Learning Center." There was no note, no message, just that single photograph. But Michael understood. Sarah was telling him that his love hadn't been wasted, that his sacrifice was helping build something beautiful and permanent. She was saying goodbye and thank you in the only way she could. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Connecticut in snow that reminded Michael of the day they'd first kissed in Millbrook. He no longer searched for Sarah or followed leads about her whereabouts. Instead, he focused on becoming the man she'd seen in him, someone worthy of being loved by someone so extraordinary that she could transform heartbreak into hope for dozens of children. Kate married a childhood friend that spring, a quiet ceremony that made the society pages but generated none of the drama of her abandoned wedding to Michael. She invited him to the reception, where they danced once for old time's sake, two people who'd finally found peace with the paths their lives had taken. "Are you happy?" she asked as they swayed to music that spoke of second chances and new beginnings. Michael considered the question, thinking of board meetings where he fought for programs that helped children like those Sarah was raising, of the scholarship recipients who sent him thank you letters, of the quiet satisfaction that came from using his privilege for something meaningful. "I'm content," he said finally. "Which might be more important than happiness." Kate smiled, recognizing her own words from a conversation they'd had months earlier. "She'd be proud of you, you know, the man you've become." "I hope so," Michael replied, and meant it. As autumn painted Vermont in colors that matched Sarah's golden hair, Michael received one final communication from the Whitmore Foundation. It was an invitation to their annual donor appreciation event, addressed simply to anonymous benefactor, but sent to his personal address. Michael knew he wouldn't attend. Seeing Sarah again would only complicate the peace they'd both worked so hard to achieve. But he kept the invitation in his desk drawer, a reminder that love sometimes looked like letting go, and that the most beautiful endings weren't always the ones where lovers reunited. Instead, he continued building the legacy Sarah had inspired, a business empire that prioritized people over profits, a foundation that bore his name but reflected her values, a life that honored the woman who'd loved him enough to walk away. On quiet evenings in his Greenwich mansion, Michael sometimes allowed himself to imagine Sarah reading bedtime stories to children who'd never known consistent love before meeting her. He pictured her teaching them to plant gardens and chase fireflies, to believe in themselves the way she'd once believed in him. And in those moments, Michael understood that their love story hadn't ended. It had simply transformed into something larger than romance, something that would continue long after both their names were forgotten. Sarah had taught him that the greatest love wasn't about possession, but about creation, not about what you could hold on to, but about what you could build for others. The poor girl from Millbrook who dared to love a billionaire's son had become something more powerful than any fairy tale princess. She'd become a legacy of love that would echo through generations of children who would grow up knowing they mattered because one woman had been brave enough to sacrifice everything for their future. And Michael Thornfield, who'd once thought happiness meant having everything he wanted, learned that true joy came from becoming someone worthy of being remembered by the woman who'd loved him enough to let him go. Love, he finally understood, didn't always look like forever. Sometimes it looked like a woman walking away with $1 million check and a heart full of dreams for children who needed a mother more than she needed a fairy tale ending. Sometimes love looked like learning to be grateful for the gift of having known her at all.